Our guest today is the Honorable Ambassador from Israel to the United States, Michael Leiter. Ambassador, you're watching Moran Stellar, who is one of the hostages, fortunately, that was freed and did not perish in what happened on October 7th. When you watch this, it reminds people why we are where we are today, because of that vicious, savage attack on Israel that day. What changed for your tiny nation?
Well, so much has changed. First of all, let me thank you for the invitation to spend some time with you, Armstrong. As soon as we sat down, you said, this is a program where we have full discussions and we don't talk in sound bites. And that was music to my ears, because since the war began last Thursday, I've been giving interviews almost every hour, and most of the time it's sound bites, and it's very difficult to convey a full message in sound bites. And a in-depth discussion is really what I've been looking for, and I'm honored to be able to do it with you. The most frequently asked question I get is, why last Thursday? Why do we launch our attack on Iran now? And I think it's very important to explain this connection, what we just saw. This war didn't begin on Thursday. A year and a half ago, Hamas, which is an Iranian proxy, trained by Iran, funded by Iran, supported by Iran. Iran's the patron of Hamas. They sent Hamas storming across our southern border. They slaughtered 1,200 people and took 251 hostages. You saw one of the hostages just released. Shortly after that attack by Hamas, we were attacked by another Iranian proxy in the north, the Hezbollah, that rained missiles down on our civilian population centers. And then there was Hezbollah Iraq and Hezbollah Syria that started firing missiles on us. And the orchestrator of all of this was the Ayatollah of Iran. He's the head of the snake. And they had created this plan or project, which they repeat openly, to eliminate Israel, just eliminate the state, wipe it off the face of the earth, by creating a ring of fire. So it would be Hamas in the southwest, Houthis in the farther southeast, Hezbollah in the north, Hezbollah Syria, Hezbollah Iraq, and then have Iranians fire ballistic missiles into the center of the country all at once. And what happened was, Hamas were so eager to get this attack underway that they jumped the gun. They didn't wait for everybody else to participate.
So they were aware?
They were very much aware. They were part of this overall program to destroy us.
So they became anxious?
They became anxious, and it's interesting, they probably jumped the gun. We try to assess what exactly it was that happened. That Yechiel Sinwar decided to not wait for his colleagues in Hezbollah and Iran, not wait for the order from the Ayatollah, and just jump the gun, probably because it was our holiday. It was a holiday of Simchat Torah, the day when we celebrate the giving of the Torah, the Bible. And he saw himself in a historic mode, and he thought of himself like the Yom Kippur War, when we were attacked by our neighbors in 1973 on the holiest day of the year. So I guess he thought that it was a historic action. He would attack on this holy day of ours, the giving of the Torah day. And it was a horrific breakdown of our system. We were caught off guard. It was a perfect storm, and we lost 1,200 people in one day, in a few hours. I mean, just slaughtered everybody in their path. But this was the program that was orchestrated by Iran. And that's what Hezbollah wanted to do in the north, the very same thing. So when we launched this attack on Iran on Thursday night, this is the culmination of a year and a half of war directed against us. But the truth is, it goes back even farther. It's not a year and a half of war. Iran has been at war with the West, not only Israel, with Western civilization, with the United States. I mean, Iran has killed over 900 American soldiers over the past 30 years. Iran is a malevolent actor around the world. And you've got Iranian terror cells operating in Western Africa, across the Sahel region. You've got Iranian terror cells operating in the triangle of Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay. You've got malevolent actors on behalf of Iran operating in Europe. And most importantly, they have tried to achieve hegemony over the entire Middle East and inject fear into their neighbors like Saudi Arabia and the Emirates.
Why don't you explain, because I think you're pinpointing something here, what Americans should know about Israel's role in protecting America's best interests in the Middle East. We hear this in sound bites, but you're not just protecting your interests, you're also protecting our interests. Explain that.
You know who said something very interesting, fascinating, just the other day? The Chancellor of Germany. And it was after a meeting he had with President Trump at the G7. It's not a coincidence. When he came back to Germany, he said, he was asked about the war, and he said, Israel is doing the dirty work for all of us. He said, Iran is a regime that has caused murder and mayhem, death and destruction around the world. And if Israel wasn't doing it, everybody else would have to do it sooner or later. But we're doing the dirty work. That was his language. Israel is doing the dirty work for Western civilization. And the truth is, for us, it's a matter of, to be or not to be. And we've chosen to be. Here's the most important point. Our Prime Minister is often chastised. He's called warmonger. And
he's accused of committing genocide.
Well, yeah, I'll get to that in a minute. But on this issue of Iran, they've been saying, well, he's been warning about Iran now for 15 years. Now, here's an interesting historical fact. Adolf Hitler started talking about menacing his neighbors, taking over the countries around Germany in 1923. But he couldn't implement it for 15 years. He started actually to implement that, his malevolent behavior, in 1938, 15 years later. It took him 15 years to build his political and military power. And during that time, there was one man, Winston Churchill, who was warning the Allies. This man is a menace, and he's going to cause a world war. And instead, Hitler was appeased. No, he doesn't really mean it. He's not really going to do it. Let's give it a chance. Let's talk. Diplomacy is better than war.
He started seizing territory. They said, that's okay. We'll let him have that.
Just a little bit more.
Just a little bit more.
Just a little bit more, and then it'll be over.
Yes.
And we ended up with the Second World War, 65 million dead, 6 million Jews gassed in the gas chambers. And we should have learned a lesson that when it comes to tyrants, murderers, and people who say they're interested in killing you, you have to learn that lesson. When somebody says, I'm going to kill you, you got to believe them. That's the main lesson of the Holocaust. And had we not appeased Hitler, the world would have been different. History would have been different. So our Prime Minister Netanyahu, very much like Winston Churchill, has been warning the world now for 15 years that Iran is on the way to a nuclear bomb. And what's fascinating is, the head of the CIA just gave testimony yesterday in the Senate, and he was asked about American intel that seemed to indicate that they weren't going for a bomb immediately, that it was going to take some time. And he said, that's like saying that the quarterback leads the team down the field 99 yards, and that doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to go for the end zone. He says if a quarterback marches the team down 99 yards, it's just a matter of a split second for him to cross into the end zone. So you don't want a situation where Iran is a nuclear threshold, where tomorrow they can actually deliver a bomb. They have enough enriched uranium for 9 bombs now. All they've got to do is take the material and pair it with a delivery system. And once you pair it with a delivery system, you're a nuclear state.
How much of that has been damaged by the last week?
A lot. Not enough, but a lot. We've taken out the main center of Natanz, where they were enriching uranium. We've taken out another center at Isfahan, where they did conversion of material into the yellow cake material that goes into the nuclear bomb. We have a number of other sites that still have to be taken out. You know, you've seen it in the news.
Define what would be enough.
Enough would mean that they no longer have a path for years to come. I don't want to quantify it in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. You know, look, if it's 10 or 20 years away, the chances are they're not going to go back to that pattern. So we have to make it permanent enough that no government in Iran will ever make a choice again to go in that direction.
And what does it require to make that a reality?
Well, it means dismantlement. It means that the centrifuges they have spinning now have to be dismantled. It means a ironclad commitment under international inspection for no more enrichment. It's Armstrong. It's imperative to understand this point, and many people miss it because, you know, the Iranians, they're very clever negotiators.
Hold that point. I don't want to disrupt the point that you're about to make. We're going to take a quick break with the ambassador. I'm Armstrong Williams, and we'll be back. Please continue, Ambassador Leiter.
Well, before we went to the break, I began to explain about how the pairing of nuclear material and a weaponization of it works, because the Iranians are very clever. You know, they're like, selling Persian rugs in the Teherani Shuk. They're very clever, but they don't tell the truth. And they talk about a civilian nuclear program or civilian nuclear energy. But you don't need enrichment for a civilian program. As a matter of fact, any country that has enrichment of uranium has a nuclear bomb. And every country, and there are dozens of countries that have a civilian nuclear program, don't have enrichment. Because what you do is you import the fissile material, you process it, and then you export it. And all of that is done under international scrutiny. So if Iran really just wants a civilian nuclear program, nobody's opposed to that. But it's very clear that they're racing towards enrichment. And getting back to what I said before about our prime minister warning the world for 15 years, look, the president, one thing I got to say about working with the president,
Trump.
With President Trump, working with his administration, the president means what he says what he means, and he sent a letter to the Ayatollah, and he said, look, we're going to negotiate for 60 days. You can make a choice. You can either dismantle your nuclear program yourself in a deal, through negotiations, without any military activity, without any kinetic warfare, or it can be done the other way, through a military strike. Now, they dragged out these negotiations for 60 days. Now, why did the president say 60 days? I mean, why didn't he say 6 years or 6 months? Because it's clear to him, as he said on the plane coming back from the G7, that they're racing towards a nuclear bomb. They're at 60% enrichment, okay? If you go to 90%, which is 1% of the process, in other words, it's a very tiny part of the process of enrichment to go from 60 to 90, and that's weapons grade. And then you pair it with a delivery system, you've got a nuclear bomb, and they have enough of this enriched material for 9 bombs.
Now, the ambassador was born in Scranton, Pennsylvania, And in 2004, when Mr. Netanyahu was the finance minister, he was his chief of staff. He also worked with the education in the Israeli government. So he's truly an American. I just want to make note of that. You know, Iran's nuclear program, what further should Israel take to address concerns about Iran's nuclear program? You talked about in its ability to develop its nuclear weapons. I mean, it is fascinating when you think about the cell phones and how you were able to penetrate literally its security perimeter, how you were able to go in and plant the drones and the other devices to make sure you're successful once you decided to go alone in this attack. You know, how do you address, though, if you cannot resolve this through negotiations? What is it you're willing to do militarily, strategically, to make sure that your end goal, years down the road, they don't have the capacity to develop a nuclear bomb?
We've got to do what it takes militarily to ensure, unless they come to the negotiating table and say they're going to dismantle.
Define what it takes.
It means taking out their nuclear sites. It means taking out their facilities, their production sites for centrifuges, for the enrichment of uranium, the delivery systems, the weaponization systems. It means that has to be destroyed and set back for many years to come.
Now, you made it clear, unlike President Trump sometimes alludes, you're not interested in a regime change. That's up to the people there to change the regime.
We're not in that business.
You're not in that business.
We're not in that business. Look, the Iranian people have to make that decision. They've tried many times, as a matter of fact. By the way, I just got to interject here. We're on Juneteenth, right?
Yeah, it's Juneteenth.
We're on Juneteenth.
Yeah.
We're on a holiday.
Yeah.
What is Juneteenth? Juneteenth is Freedom Day, right? Is Emancipation Day. The Iranian people have been looking for emancipation, you know. 90 million people are looking for emancipation from this tyrannical regime. Do you know how many political prisoners are in Iranian prisons? 15,000 people for expressing views that oppose the Ayatollahs. And they're torture chambers. I mean, there's horrific stuff going on under this regime. So the Iranian people have tried to rise up several times, and what they do is these Ayatollahs shoot them in the back, take them into prisons and torture them. If we can facilitate the ability of the Iranian people to rise up and shake off the yoke of this tyranny and create their own Juneteenth, God bless, right?
No, I want to go back to Moran Stella, who has spent 54 days in captivity. She said something very fascinating in our interview with her. She said she does not only cry for what Israelis and the Jewish people are enduring in Israel as a result of this war, but also the people in Gaza, the people in Palestine, because many people that she knew who lost their lives. You lost a son in 2023 in Gaza, so you know what that is like. It's a feeling that never heals. And some people want to believe that you only have compassion and care for about the people, those that in Israel, but that is not the case with you, because you know what it's like to lose someone so close to your heart.
I cared about the Palestinians living next to me before I lost my son. I care about people. Israel cares about people. We don't want confrontation with anybody. But we have to get our head around this fact that there are people who want to destroy the state of Israel and fundamentally believe that we don't have a right to exist. I mean, you have this here on college campuses with, you know, intellectuals screaming from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. What does that mean? It's annihilationist. From the river to the sea, that's where Israel is. So if you talk about, you know, free Palestine, what you're talking about is eradicating the state of Israel. That's annihilationist. We have to protect ourselves. We can't experiment anymore. Look, we're a tiny little country. You know, we talk about Israel being the size of New Jersey. It is the size of New Jersey, except New Jersey is kind of like a hamburger. It's round. We're like a hot dog. You can cut us in half very easily. We're 40 miles wide with the disputed territories of Judea and Samaria. That's the whole kit and caboodle. That's the whole country, 40 miles wide. I mean, I just drove here from downtown Washington, and it was probably wider than the entire state of Israel.
Here's what I can't get my head around. You know, I was just at Auschwitz and Dachau, and I'm telling you, I don't know if I've ever felt those kind of emotions. I don't know if I've ever smelled death in such a riveting way. And all of a sudden, the storm came and the rain, and we were standing on the tracks where they would bring the Jews in and slaughter. And I keep asking myself, I saw what happened a few weeks ago where 2 of your staffers were just assassinated. And this continues. And I ask myself, what is it that where there's just such disdain for Jews? And there was only one conclusion that I could come to, and I hope you can tell me that I'm wrong, is that there are people on this planet that absolutely hate Jews. It's hatred.
Armstrong, it's nothing new. I mean, it's from the time that our grandfather, our mutual grandfather, Abraham, grandfather of monotheism, stood up in the world and said, you guys got it all wrong. Man doesn't create God. God creates man. It was a revolutionary idea. I mean, it was iconoclastic. It was breaking idols. And ever since then, there's been hatred of Jews. There's been anti-Semitism. We have to carry a revolutionary idea forward. And particularly now that we've come back to the land of Israel, it's a fulfillment of prophecies that nobody thought were real. And it's unprecedented in the annals of history for a people exiled from their land to actually return to it after such a long time. So we never gave up. And here's a really important point. You know, Zionism isn't new. You know, people say, well, I love the Jews except I hate the Zionists. Or I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm anti-Zionist or anti-Israel. Well, don't determine for us what Judaism is, because there's no Judaism without Zionism. Abraham was commanded right at the outset, at the beginning of our history, to go to the land. If you ask somebody leaving Egypt, here, we're on Freedom Day, right? When the Jews got their freedom from Egypt, you tapped them on the shoulder and said, hey, where are you going? They wouldn't have said to Sinai. They didn't know anything about Sinai, but they knew about going to the land of Canaan. They knew about going to the land of Israel. And that's been at the center of our lives. A Jew prays, he faces Jerusalem, no matter where he is in the world. He ends his Passover Seder with next year in Jerusalem. Next year in Jerusalem is like a very, very fundamental aspect of our religious credo. So when people say, you know, Zionism is new, no, political Zionism was a product of the late 19th century when it became possible to reconstitute the Zionism that we believed in for 3,500 years. But it wasn't new. It was a 3,500-year-old idea. So we're fulfilling that vision, that a very fundamental aspect of our religious credo.
Let me bring this conversation closer to home. What role does the United States play, if any, in Israel's approach to the Iran conflict, particularly regarding potential de-escalation, or if they get involved, escalation of the errors of this effort? And what is Israel's stance, let's just say, on resuming nuclear negotiation with Iran, given the recent escalation? Iran has asked the United States to intervene. Is that entirely off the table?
Look, if the Iranians come around now, after the damage that's been wrought in their country, and say, okay, now we're ready to dismantle the nuclear program, that's fine. But the goal, as we talked before about regime change, the goal is not regime change. The goal is to defang this country that talks every day about destroying us. And by the way, this Ayatollah, he doesn't just talk about destroying Israel. He chants, he's got thousands of people standing around him in the center of Tehran, and he leads chants, death to America, death to America.
Well, they've made no secret about wanting to assassinate our president.
They sent 2 assassination teams to assassinate the president. They sent an assassination team to take out former National Security Advisor John Bolton, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and they've killed over 900 American soldiers around the world. I mean, death to America, you know, it's hard for people to understand this, you know, back home in Kansas, you know, we're all like kind of on the yellow brick road. We all think that around the world it operates like it does back home here in America. Well, that's not the case. There are people who really want to destroy America.
You know, when we come back, I want to delve into what role would Israel like the United States to play, because there are many narratives out there that your prime minister convinced the president to play a larger role, because in the beginning, there's no question, he distanced himself when Israel was willing to go it alone. But when he realized how successful you were, shockingly successful, he started to transform. And then we want to talk about what life is like on the ground in Israel with families that must have endured this escalation of the war. And we'll be back. I'm Armstrong Williams.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. Oh, wow. You recognize that shot. Yes. I want to come back to whether Israel is seeking more involvement from the United States in the conflict with Iran, and what specifically does Israel want the United States to do and not do, by the way.
You mentioned before about the Prime Minister convincing President Trump about involvement in this effort. I don't think anybody thinks that President Trump is someone who's very easily convinced to do something he doesn't want to do, right? The president is a leader. He has a very clear vision. Since he came into office, he said 15 times, I counted it, 15 times that Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. So, we've put all the contingencies in front of the administration, and President Trump will make a decision about where he comes in, if he comes in these contingencies. But I got to tell you something. We accomplished in 3 days what Russia has not accomplished in 3 years. We achieved air supremacy over Iran in 3 days. And we're a tiny little country. Iran is 75 times the size of Israel. Russia is 4 times the population and 28 times the size of Ukraine, and still has not achieved air superiority over Ukraine. So we have a few, tricks up our sleeves, obviously, right? And everybody asks about the Ayatollah. We're going to take him out. We're not going to take him out. He has protection, doesn't have protection. Right now, the Ayatollah is looking over his left shoulder and looking for his nuclear scientists. There's nobody there. Then he look over his right shoulder for the generals in charge of his IRGC, this terror network that he conducts around the world, and there are no generals left. His chief of staff was taken out Thursday night, and then Friday he appointed a replacement who lasted to Tuesday. So there's a job description out there for chief of staff that there aren't too many people standing in line to accept right now.
What is Israel's exit plan for Iran?
Our exit plan is to achieve our goal. No more path to a nuclear weapon, no more ballistic missiles. Look, they have a program, Armstrong, to develop 300 ballistic missiles a month. You know what these ballistic missiles are? They're like, imagine a semi-trailer that you see on, the New Jersey Turnpike, a semi-trailer, packed with TNT, cruising through the sky. beyond the speed of light and crashing into population centers. I mean, the extent of damage they can cause is just astounding. They're producing 300 a month. That's 3,500 a year. And the Ayatollah said, if we shoot thousands of ballistic missiles at Israel, that tiny country, all at once, what are they going to do except die? So we're not going to die. This is to be or not to be, and we've chosen to be. It's very simple.
What do you say to the critics that Prime Minister Netanyahu started this war to stay in power and not face his legal troubles?
I can't think of anything more vicious and libelous and disgusting. We're a democracy. The Prime Minister is not a dictator. He can't make a decision by himself to go to war. And, you know, the thought that a man who has cared about his country, who has dedicated his life to his country and his people, would engage in warfare because of a personal issue, it's just astounding that there's no limit to what political opposition could say or do or think. It's just beyond the limits.
You know, the United States wrongly declared that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction in 2003. There are people who are out saying that Israel, similar, is not developing weapons of mass destruction. How do you respond?
Well, we know that Iran is developing weapons of mass destruction. That's why the president gave the Ayatollah 60 days. He didn't give him 6 years. And he said repeatedly that they can't have nuclear weapons. Now, if he didn't think that they were trying to achieve nuclear weapons, why would he say that? Why would he give a limit? We know for sure. Our intel is very clear. And by the way, you know, the day before the 60 days were up, the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, issued a report. And, you know, until now, their reports have been very, very mediocre. This report was damning and basically vindicated everything that our prime minister has been saying for 15 years. They are marching to a nuclear weapon. And I got to emphasize an important point. First of all, if they have a nuclear weapon, they're going to push the button because they said they will. And when somebody says they're going to kill you, believe them. They're an apocalyptic, occultic death wish. They'll push the button. But even before they push the button, they have all these proxies operating around the world. Now imagine we have to confront Hamas, we have to confront Hezbollah, we have to confront the Houthis, disturbing international waterways, globalization, trade. You know how many ships there are on the oceans every day? 55,000. Everything you see around is shipped. And the Houthis were involved in stopping international maritime trade. So imagine that you have to deal with the Houthis operating under a nuclear umbrella. Imagine we have to confront Hamas after slaughtering 1,200 people when they're operating under a nuclear umbrella. The whole world changes. That means Iran takes hegemony over the Middle East. That means China takes hegemony over the Middle East because China and Iran are this close. I mean, they're one. You know, when the United States put sanctions on Iran, how did they get beyond the sanctions? They got beyond the sanctions through the good services of China. Okay?
So you know, with all that you're saying, and listen, even for these Holocaust deniers, which is just outrageous, all they need to do is go and they would understand that is as real today as it was 80 years ago. What about these university students and these protests that are so sympathetic to the Palestinians and they see Israel as the bully and Israel in the wrong, and you see all from London to Paris and everywhere. How does this happen? Where does this propaganda, this misinformation come from? How do they get to see the reality of the situation? And accusing Netanyahu of genocide.
You mentioned my son a few minutes ago. Let me tell you, if we were guilty of what we're being accused of doing, my son would be alive today. My son led troops into Gaza to get our hostages out and to stop Hamas from firing missiles into our cities on foot. If we strafe bomb population centers, if we just sent our artillery to bomb the smithereens out of them, my son would be alive today. But he led his troops on foot. And he went into a booby-trapped house that came crashing down on top of him, killing him and 3 of his command team, blowing the legs off 5 of his command team that were on the other side of the wall. This is a libel, just like the Middle Ages when they said that we use blood in our matzahs for Passover and our wafers. No, we don't do that. We don't do that. We don't do genocide. Now, how has the world gone crazy? How our campuses have gone crazy with this? Look, during the time of the Soviet Union, there were many people who couldn't believe that the Soviet Union really had intention of destroying America. And there were useful idiots running around the campuses then in favoring communism, saying communism was the right way to go. And it was more moral. And they reached some sort of moral equivalence between the United States and the Soviet Union. So people have moral confusion, but there are leaders, and President Trump certainly is at the helm in creating a sense of moral clarity. No, there's a qualitative distinction between ideas. And this far left, neo-Marxist approach is something that Israel is at the forefront of contending with. I mean, we're the Judeo-Christian civilization in the middle of the Middle East. And what we have in Islam today is a contest between the reformers, those who want a reformation within Islam, and those who are the counter-reformations, who want to go back into a fundamentalist state, who are very extreme, who want to reject moderation and accommodation with Judeo-Christian civilization. So those who want to accommodate the West, Europe, the United States, particularly the United States, want to accommodate Israel, because we're an extension of Western civilization, extension of the Judeo-Christian civilization in the Middle East. Those who oppose accommodation with the West are committed to destroying Israel. So if we succeed in solidifying our presence and our permanence, the entire West benefits. Judeo-Christian civilization benefits. The world benefits because there's accommodation between religions. There's accommodation between civilizations and peoples.
So what do you say to those, and the narratives are there, Israel is on the cusp of leading the world into World War III?
Israel's on the cusp of leading the world into a permanent peace. This is a war to end wars, because you can't possibly achieve peace without strength. You know, Machiavelli said a long time ago, if you want to achieve peace, prepare for war, because you have to recognize the fact that there is evil out there. And this goes back to your question before about how could it be that on these campuses people are running around screaming in favor of people who butcher and murder and assassinate? How could it be? Because we've been taken over in many respects, particularly in academia in the West, with this idea of moral relativism, that there's no such thing as objective truth. There's no such thing as objective morality. Israel is at the apex of a statement which says, yes, there is objective morality. Yes, there is objective truth. And there is such a thing as evil. And if you work to eradicate another people, that's evil. And if you're constantly engaged in terrorism, that's evil. Look, on the issue of the Palestinians, I mean, we have been withdrawing now for 30 years. We've negotiating. We go into negotiations from Oslo. We step back. We give them more autonomy, give them more power, give them a path to Palestinian statehood. And what have we gotten? The first Intifada and the second Intifada, school buses being blown up, Molotov cocktails being thrown every day, shooting attacks on our civilians. At a certain point, we've got to stop back and say, look, if you're not interested in peace, then we're going to achieve it through strength, not through withdrawal, not through compromise anymore. We're a tiny little country. We have nothing else to give up. So either you accommodate or you have to deal with our strength. And after the Holocaust, we're not going to lose our strength. We don't have a second chance. We saw what happens when we don't have strength. Jews without power is a death knell, is Auschwitz. We're not going back there.
And we'll be back.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
And welcome back. Mr. Ambassador, can the campaign to end Iran's nuclear weapons development capabilities succeed without U.S. assistance, such as the bunker busting bombs to destroy Iran's underground Fordo site? And also, Netanyahu has said he would not rule out assassinating Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, and said it would end the conflict. What are the calculations Israel is weighing with regards to that question, even though President Trump has made it clear that he took that off the table?
The issue, again, is focusing on the goal, what Aristotle called the telos. Where are we going? What's the end game? The end game is to defang Iran. It's not regime change. Again, that belongs to the people. The people have to make that decision. So any decision about who we're taking out is going to be based on the end game. Is that going to contribute to ensuring that Iran doesn't have a path to a nuclear bomb and will not produce ballistic missiles to fire into Israel? So that's in that regard. Regarding Fordo and various different sites, we have contingencies, and President Trump will decide whether or not the United States is getting involved. It's well known to everybody that there's a particular munition ordinance that can take out Fordo and that we don't have, but that's a decision the president will take. But there are other possibilities for dealing with Fordo, which will obviously weigh under the circumstances. We are ready with contingencies, and I think that we've proven, as I mentioned before, about taking air superiority over Iran in 3 days, taking out all of the nuclear scientists and the generals all at once. That was a simultaneous act. In 1 minute, they all went. So we have some surprises, and if we have to deal with Fordo and other sites on our own, we'll do so.
You know, I've been to Israel probably about 17 times. Aideen and I were there when they were detonating bombs in restaurants. And
the Second Intifada.
Yeah, we were there. And we were there, I'll never forget, all these bodies were just all across the ground, and the cell phones were ringing, and somebody said, why don't somebody answer? And someone blurted out, because they're all dead. And I've seen it firsthand. I've seen being at the Golan Heights, and a missile lands feet away from where we are. I've seen it firsthand. And, you know, I asked you earlier in the show, what is it like living there? I mean, missiles going off and people have seconds to get to their bunkers, the debris coming from nowhere. Apartment buildings collapsed in Tel Aviv, and Haifa has been hit. Jerusalem is somewhat unscathed, but obviously it makes me really appreciate living in America. We have no idea what it's like not having to run for bomb shelters and those sirens going off. So I just want people to really understand what Israelis, and not just Israelis, what the Iranians live with every day because of the leaders that they choose, they're the leaders that chooses them.
You know, one of the miracles, there are a lot of miracles when it comes to Israel, but the biggest miracle is the resilience of our people. Despite what you described, we come out on the happiness index internationally among the top 10 every year. Last year, even though we experienced October 7th, we were number 4 on the happiness index. Do you know that of all the developed countries in the world, there's 36 countries in the OECD. That's the Organization of Economic Development. Those are the developed, richest countries in the world. There's 36. There's only one country with replacement fertility. Replacement fertility means that there's at least 2.1 kids per family. It means that there's a future, because if you have no working hands, who's going to pay for retirement pension plans, right? Who's going to work the factories? Who's going to develop the economy? Who's going to grow the economy? The only country in the world The only developed country in the world with replacement fertility is Israel. And that's 3 generations after Holocaust. Tell me if you don't believe in miracles. That's the resilience of the Israeli people. So despite what you described, despite the terrorism that we've experienced, incessant, it just doesn't stop. People are resolute, people are so resilient and so committed to building a society of kindness, of justice, of the right of the Jewish people to live in the land of Israel freely. And we persist in that regard. I mean, just look at our kids, look at this generation. Our sons and daughters flying these F-35s. By the way, it's a great collaborative effort. You know, I mentioned yesterday in an interview that the distance between Israel and Tehran is 1,400 miles. And the distance between Washington and Fort Worth is 1,400 miles. Now, why is Fort Worth significant? Not only because of Juneteenth in Texas, right? Galveston, that history. But Fort Worth is where the F-35s are manufactured. Okay? So you put the Israeli pilots, our sons and daughters, in these cockpits of the F-35s of Lockheed Martin. We've got a great combination going. I mean, they're doing an incredible job. Air superiority in 3 days. It's unheard of.
Unheard of. You know, you said something interesting, though. Of all the enemies you've had to fight over the last many decades, and even if you're successful with Iran, there will always be another enemy.
Well, we hope not. We're moving. There's a promise. There's a promise that we're moving towards. We're not post. You know, there's post-structuralism and postmodernism. We're a pre-people.
But some people
we believe in the future.
But you're a man of faith, and you understand the Bible, and the Bible tells us that there will never be peace.
No, actually, the Bible teaches whether it's a second coming or a first coming, but there's an end of days. There's a days when, you know, when the lamb lies down with the lion. And we are convinced, we are absolutely convinced and committed to those days when the lamb lies down with the lion.
So, as you say that, I ask this in a different way. Is there any hope for a negotiated settlement with Iran over the nuclear issue to achieve that peace that you speak about? So the citizens, the everyday people, don't have to live with this chaos and this reign of terror and death. And what would success look like, I mean, in this conflict? What is the pathway to diplomacy or the conflict? And how do we maintain such a strong relationship with an important ally if we don't agree on strategy? Trump seemingly wants to destroy nuclear capability without a regime change, but that doesn't seem to be the same view as we discussed with you. And how do divided partisan politics impact this moment?
Well, there's a very partisan atmosphere in Washington. It doesn't make it easier for somebody like me, an ambassador from Israel. I'd love more of a bipartisan atmosphere. I work towards that, by the way. Very important for me. Anytime I go to the Hill to visit with both Republicans and Democrats, that's how I divide my day. I think Israel should be a bipartisan issue. I work towards that all the time, tirelessly. Look, you know, the end game, we need imagination. Could anybody have imagined a year ago that there'd be a government in Syria that wouldn't be a proxy of Iran, that would be talking about peace with Israel? I mean, it was unimaginable. Could you imagine a government in Lebanon that was actually working to disarm Hezbollah? And yet we have that under General Allen today. So, you know, Netanyahu has changed much of the Middle East with a vision that it is possible, it is conceivable. And if we take out Iran, a path to nuclear weapon, we're going to change, you know, countries are going to line up to sign the Abraham Accords. And this is going to be Abraham Accords 2.0.
But you know, the conflict in Gaza also continues. And some U.S. officials and allies still want a two-state solution. I hear this is what Macron is advocating. I'm sure I know your take on that. And Americans are already divided over the Palestinian conflict. What concerns do you have about expanding conflicts in the region? And also, obviously, a two-state solution is not going to work. They have every opportunity for a two-state solution. They don't want a two-state solution. We know that, but it sounds good.
But we discussed the fact that we're not talking in sound bites. Two-state solution is a soundbite.
Yes, it is.
You know,
We
it's
agree.
it's kumbaya.
Yes.
But it's not two, it's not state, it's not solution.
Right.
Look, we tried for 30 years, it hasn't worked. So we can talk about autonomy, we can talk about growing the Human Development Index, we can talk about all sorts of federalism solutions and so on, but we're not going to have an independent state west of the Jordan River. It's just not going to happen, other than Israel. So we want very much for our Palestinian cousins, brothers, friends, to live in peace and harmony, and we want to see their economic growth improve, and we want to see them live in educational, social peace and harmony.
It benefits.
But we're not going to tolerate terrorism. They've got to leave terrorism.
Yeah. You know, we have a minute left. What sustains you?
My oldest son, the first one to call me dad, was a beautiful human being. He was 39 years old. He had just completed med school. And he left me 6 grandchildren. And he chose to go to war to protect and defend the state of Israel and the Jewish people. And it's very hard going on living when you lose somebody that you love so much. But every morning, I put him on my shoulders. I give him a little piggyback like I did when he was a little kid. And as I go through the day and face the challenges of life, I ask him for support and help and guidance. And somewhere from the Garden of Eden, he sends me strength. And that's how I move forward.
Mr. Ambassador, you're a good man.
Thank you, Armstrong. It's good to be with you.
Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for joining us for this edition of the Armstrong Williams Show. A very good education, I might add.